what you told us. We brought you the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. We melted her.
Oh, you liquidated her, eh? Very resourceful.
Yes, sir. So we'd like you to keep your promise to us, if you please, sir.
Not so fast. Not so fast. I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, but I want to go home now.
You've had plenty of time already.
Yeah. Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you are really great and powerful, you'll keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
Oh.
The great Oz has spoken.
Oh.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh, you're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
Gee, where's this going? You know, isn't that something? 1939. How many times have you seen it? 100,000. I have no idea, and it still draws us in. It's just amazing to me. So, welcome everybody again. We're coming to the end of the year, and in fact, this is really the last Sunday of the end of our year. And yes, I know it's not December 31st, that's a month away, but you know, at church we have something called the Jesus calendar. And so we start our new year about 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas with something we call Advent. So we're kind of ramping up to that first great story about Jesus, the story of his birth. And so this is our last Sunday, and for this last year, we've had a number of sermon series, but they've all had this one overarching theme, something we've called Be a Part of Something Larger Than Yourself. We've been saying that. I've had you repeat it. I'm sure you know it by gunpoint by now. But I have to tell you that it's over the course of the last year, it's been more than just something we say around here. It's actually been happening. And I find that just incredibly gratifying. Case in point, this last week, you all remember I came in front of you on Sunday and there was this very tragic accident. School teacher's husband passed away in the accident, and I'd been in contact with Mr. Sudol, their principal, and that morning, just an hour or so before church, he said, could you send some volunteers over, because we need to have a staff meeting, and we weren't planning on that. And so Monday morning rolls around, and we have 10 volunteers plus Shelley and myself, and they start kind of coming in 2 at a time. And most of them are school teachers, not all of them, but most of them are school teachers. They checked in at the office, and Brad was going to give them instructions as to where to go, but they were already gone because all they had to know was where they were going, and they just sort of fell into place. Former teachers, they knew exactly what to do. And, you know, I have to tell you, you know, probably for most of those people, it wasn't a big deal. It's just an hour of their time. You know, it's just greeting kids as they come off the school bus. It's just answering the telephone and taking notes for the secretary about who's going to be absent because of the illnesses. It's just hanging around on the playground and watching the kids play, or maybe just engaging them in some games. You know, it's just those little things, and it just seems like so little. It's just an hour of time. But I will tell you that everybody in that building knew why we were there. The teachers knew why we were there. The students knew why we were there. And you know, when they got off the bus, if they didn't know, by the end of the day, they did know. And I've heard all week about this. Folks felt like First Lutheran had their backs. And, you know, because we're not here to be First Lutheran, we're here to be Jesus. Jesus had their backs. Be a part of something larger than yourself, right? And I've seen little signs of this all around the congregation all year long. And by the way, there's one more chance before the end of the year and we start the new year next year. Tomorrow morning at 10, tomorrow afternoon at 1, Tuesday morning at 10, Tuesday morning at 1. Pay no attention to that woman behind the curtain. We need you here because we have 60 young people. Some of them don't have the kind of love and attention that would really lead them to a place where they believe that they are valuable. So don't leave this for somebody else that's sitting next to you. You know, in fact, just turn to the person next to you and say, I don't care what you're going to do, but I'm going to be here tomorrow. Just do that right now. Yeah, there we go. All right. All right. Good, good. So that means everybody's going to be here. That's wonderful. I got that one out of the way. And by the way, so you know, what we were doing was very real. And what we continue to do is very real. And that's very different from what you just saw in this movie clip, right? So it's Wizard of Oz. Dorothy Gale lives in Kansas, has been whisked away by a twister, and has been dropped in this magical land of Oz, and she just wants to get home, and everyone is telling her about this great and powerful Wizard of Oz, who, if you want to go home, this is the guy who will get you there. And so she makes the trip, and everyone's talking about, you know, how wonderful he is, how powerful he is, how wise, how thoughtful he can, you know, the things that he can do, the way that he protects us. And Dorothy begins to believe that herself, and then she meets him. Oh my, you know, this enigmatic, mysterious figure in and out of the smoke and the fire, this big, booming voice that fills the royal chamber. And Dorothy does everything that the big, booming voice tells her she has to do to get home, only to find out that there is no all-powerful wizard. It's just a fast-talking flim-flam man who has a couple of pretty cool toys to make him look really impressive, but he has no more ability to get Dorothy home than the mayor of Munchkinland does. There's nothing real about him. Well, I thought about that, strangely enough, as I thought about the church. It seems like in the church we're always looking for the next silver bullet or the next secret sauce to become successful. And especially these days. I mean, let's face it, the last 20, 30 years, church has been on the decline, attendance has been down, and many of us, not all of us, some of you are too young, and that's a good thing. I'm glad the young ones are here, but many of us remember the days when the pews were so packed that you couldn't squeeze another one in. You knew who the visitors were because they had to sit in the front pew. That was the only one left. And you set up chairs in the aisles, right? And you remember this? That's the way it was in my church anyway. And we had a church, we could seat 500 people, and we were seating 650 and 700 people. And there were still people sitting outside in the narthex going to church. And man, we would love to recapture those days, and we would do anything to make that happen. And for whatever reason, we're a lot like Dorothy. We are attracted to smoke and fire and big booming voices in the sky. And we have a way of superimposing that, if we can't find it with the next best thing, superimposing that on our pastors. Did you know that? Case in point. This was a few years ago. I was the brand new pastor at St. Olaf Lutheran Church. And I went to my first board meeting. And I was, in fact, so new that I wasn't on the payroll yet. I just wanted to see what was going on at the meeting. I had not preached my first sermon. Nobody knew who I was. I didn't know who they were. I just wanted to go and see what was happening. And so I sat in the back of the room, kind of off to the corner, and just watched and just listened. And I didn't say anything. And they got to going, and they got their meeting going. They had all these things that they were going to do, these plans, these, looking to the future and all that sort of thing. And after about 25, 30 minutes of this, I just noticed something in my chest, and so I went like this. I went, and the person, I'm not kidding, this is actually what happened. The person who was talking stopped in mid-sentence, and everyone turned and looked at me. I felt like I was in one of those 1970s Merrill Lynch commercials, when Merrill Lynch talks, people listen, and the whole world goes silent. And I didn't have the heart to tell him I had something caught in my throat. And so I did what every good pastor would do. I made something up. And a couple of people said, "Oh, yeah." The guy next to me started taking notes. The great and powerful Oz has spoken. And my friends, there has to be a better way than this, doesn't there? Let's sing. So the lesson that Kay just read to us today from 2 Timothy, this is, Paul is writing to Timothy. Paul is the senior apostle. He's sort of the head pastor of the entire church. Probably call him a bishop, maybe. I don't think they did back then, but they didn't call him that. He was sent out to start churches. And he had left Timothy behind in Ephesus, and Timothy was kind of his student, and Timothy was looking for advice, and that's what the content of the letter is. How do I be a good shepherd to people who are just trying to learn about Jesus and follow Jesus? And I want you to notice when Paul answers those questions and addresses those issues, what Paul doesn't say to Timothy. He didn't say, Timothy, he said, Timothy, it's not about your strengths. It's not about your gifts. It's not about your blindingly brilliant leadership skills and abilities. It's not about your eloquence. It's not about the way you put a sermon together or how you can pack them in on a Sunday morning. It's not about any of those things. Paul doesn't even mention it because Timothy knows that already. Instead, Paul mentions two things, two small things. And in fact, I will tell you that these two things are so small, I didn't see them until I read the passage for about the 10th time. So the first thing Paul says is, continue in what you have learned. Doesn't sound like much, right? What's Timothy learned? Well, he's learned that Jesus is not the great and powerful Oz with smoke and mirrors and booming voices. Jesus is a servant who comes into this world and makes himself low. Lower than you, lower than me, lower than Timothy, lower than Paul, lower than the lowliest person who sits in a pew, lower than the smallest person who doesn't even feel like they belong in church. Jesus makes himself that low. And he does it out of love. And because he does that, we who carry the weight and burden of our lives and our sins and our trials and our temptations and our anxieties and all the way we feel like we are not good enough and do not fit, as he makes himself lower than that, out of love, we find that we are drawn to him. And Paul picks up on that. And he says to Timothy, continue in that. Because that's what you've learned about who you follow. You don't follow me, you follow Jesus. Continue in that. Jesus made himself low for you when you go about your ministry, when you work with the people who you live with every single day of your life. Make yourself low as Jesus made himself low for you. Lower than their trials, lower than their troubles, lower than their sin and their anxiety and all the ways they don't feel like they're good enough. And as you do that, the same thing's going to happen. They're going to be drawn to you. And because you belong to Jesus, that also means, more importantly, they're going to be drawn to him. So Paul says, continue in what you've learned, the first thing. The second thing is, remember who you learned it from. And this one took a few times to read too, because I didn't see this. When he said that, when you remember who you learned this from, I thought Paul was maybe talking about himself. I mean, he's the great apostle. Everybody in the Christian world knows Paul. He is changing the world. He's setting it on fire. He's this great teacher, this staunch defender of the faith who stands against those who would put him down. And, you would think, well, that's who he's talking about. But Paul's not talking about himself. He's talking about Timothy's mom and Timothy's grandma, Lois and Eunice. And they are not great apostles. They are not known the world around. They are not these staunch defenders of the faith, these learned teachers. They are none of those things. They are the two women who taught Timothy the faith from the time he was born. And because she loved them, the two women loved him. That changes everything. You see, Paul understands that there is something way more powerful than a title or an education or great biblical knowledge. It's love. So they raise Timothy. They teach him about the things that matter. And it comes to them in this package of unconditional love. And that's why Timothy is where he is. He's not there because of the great teacher Paul. He's there because of those two women in his life that simply loved him and said, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life. So continue in what you've learned. Remember who you got it from, because who you got it from and what you've learned are the keys to bringing others to the faith. And think about that. And think about the one thing those two items have in common. You know what it is? They're real. Let's sing. So I have this idea that this particular lesson, and in all humility, probably this sermon is probably one of the most important things I've said to this congregation in the last year. And here's why. And let's just be frank about what we're doing here. A lot of changes have happened in the last year and a half. Almost 2 years now. My goodness, time flies, doesn't it? A lot of changes. And they're good changes. And we need to listen to what Paul has to say to Timothy, because he has the same thing to say to us. Because as this thing unfolds, we must always be cautious to make sure that what's happening here at First Lutheran is grounded in true things. Because I will tell you, at least for me, what's happening here is not about the vibe, bringing people in. It's not about the preacher, I can promise you that. It's not about feel good or entertainment, and it certainly is not about First Lutheran being the in place to come in Fort Dodge. And if it is, it's going to be a short run with a short fuse that's going to fizzle out in a hurry. Because all we are is not promoting the right things, we're promoting ourselves. And then all we become is the next shiny thing that will soon tarnish and fade to nothing, because it is not grounded in the things that matter. Remember where you come from. Remember the basics. And remember who taught you these things. That's Paul's advice to us. Those basics. Jesus is not a great and powerful Oz. No smoke, no mirrors, no booming voice that fills the chamber. He's a servant who makes himself low. So low that he has brought us to this place. Let's not lose that. And as we come here, we are called to be to others what Lois and Eunice was to Timothy. We make ourselves low so that others are drawn to us and then drawn to Jesus. There's no magic bullet here, no silver bullet, no secret sauce. It's just simply opening ourselves up to the love of Jesus in a way that we become faithful to that calling and show others the way, the truth, and the life by loving them. Now, this is especially important for those of us who have been in the church for a long time, because, my friends, contrary to popular opinion, it's not about us. It's about them. It's about those who have never felt comfortable in a church. It's about folks who have been on the outside looking in and wondering what's going on. It's about agnostics and atheists who may still have questions. And I can promise you that if they are agnostics and if they are atheists, they do. It's about people, for whatever reason, for the first time, are coming in here and asking questions and seeking deeper truths. It's about them. And when we say it's about them and we start saying it and actually meaning it, God finds that useful. And that's when things start to happen. The good things of God's kingdom. It's not about us. It's about them. It has to be about them. Otherwise, we're just glorifying ourselves. And then all of a sudden when we do that, all the decisions we make, it's based on that. It's based on them. I don't show you guys movies for entertainment value. I show you these movie clips because they're out there and people know them and they've attached themselves to those stories. And if I can use a piece of that clip to show you a greater truth about Jesus in a way you've never experienced it before, and maybe for the first time actually introduce you to Jesus through a movie clip because you've seen the movie, more's the better. We're not doing contemporary worship on Wednesday night because it's the in thing to do. We're doing it because for the first time, there are young people and children who are learning about Jesus. You should have been here Wednesday night when we did that little saying. There was one little girl, I don't even remember what the saying is, but we talked about heart and breaking, and they could probably do it better than I can, right? Okay, yeah, you can, that's right. And there's this one little girl, and she is just throwing herself into it. She's so excited, and she goes home and she tells her mom and dad about the love of Jesus she's experienced. And then in come the confirmation kids on the front row, and these guys, I don't know if you saw it or if you saw it on TV. If you saw it on TV, you saw them doing the wave. I will tell you a little secret. They are just at Kay's throat until they get in here. Let's get this crazy lesson done. We got to get to church. And yeah, it's music. That's exactly what they do, right, Kay? And yeah, it's the music that draws them in, but then there's this message. And I will tell you that I watched those kids, and I had every eye for 15 minutes. And I saw their hearts. It's not about us. It's about them. And it's not just something we say. When we stop saying it because that's what Pastor wants us to say, and we start living it, God will use us in ways that you can't even imagine are possible. I am thankful for this congregation. I am thankful for this last year. I am thankful that there is a God who is larger than us. And I am thankful that he has invited us in to the greatest journey any of us can possibly imagine. Amen.